Om. 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 Om Tat Sat. Om Satyanandam. Om Paravak Shakti. Om God speaking directly to God about God. Om. Om. Bless this convergence in all its phenomenal aspecting, seen and unseen. Om. The 19th live stream teaching of SATYAVEDISM. Om. Om. Detox, purification of the body. Lssv 19. Om. Detox. Om. Detoxification or purification of God in the form of the apparent body hallucination, Om, is of the utmost importance. For intensive, serious sadhana. Om. Om. There are all sorts of methods of deconstruction that occur. It can occur over seeming lengthy periods of time in eternity or short periods of time in eternity. Again, this is illusory because there is no time. Om. God in the happening of this particular teaching may not be considered very seeming popular, whatever popularity means in fiction. There is no concern for that. It may seem difficult to God manifest such rigor, but it is very necessary for self-realization and God realization. Om. Purification of the apparent body is of the utmost importance. There are many sorts of purification. So it may appear to occur in stages or in tandem, concurrently, in eternity, etc. Seeming levels of purification. But it is absolutely necessary. The body affects thought, and the brain within the seeming body affects body. The whole seeming system affects all aspects of itself, seemingly. So body health is of the utmost importance. And SATYAVEDISM encourages and emphasizes parent body health. For the various reasons, seemingly. One, that the bodies be treated with respect as holy. That they not be abused in any way, intentionally or unintentionally. That such purification leads to clarity of seeming mind, that leads to self-realization and God-realization. Etc. So it involves a sort of minimalistic approach, an approach to strip various toxins from the body, and also from the environment seemingly around the body. Of course, the body is the environment. It's all one, though it may seem to be differentiated into various forms. It is in fact all one, always. So it starts with a sort of minimalism, a stripping down of all the various components of the different toxins that are within the body that need to be extricated, need to be thrown off, basically needing to be purged. And this is within the teachings, in many of the teachings already, the live stream teachings, Lssvs, and the scriptures, the SSSVs, speaking of this purification. So in fact, the body only needs a few components, basically 6 to be exact. The body has a necessity for God in the form of air, and God in the form of water, and God in the form of food, Om, and then secondarily, God in the form of shelter, God in the happening of clothing, and God in the happening of medical assistance, Om. Those are the seeming basic components of functionality for the body to subsist, to keep its appearance. So in purification, this teaching specifically will be speaking it will be addressed about air, purification of air, purification through food, purification through water. All of which affect the body and the mind and the functioning of the mind. Now, the seeming reason why this might seem a very unpopular, quote-unquote, teaching is that it takes what would be called sacrifice, giving up of various seeming pleasurable toxins. Toxins that might not seem to appear to be toxins, but are. So in Lssv 73, specifically, it's already spoken about detoxification and purification through God and the happening of the practice of veganism, and the various stages to transition from seeming vegetarianism to veganism, sort of a middle ground to clean veganism, which involves further detoxification, and then to what is called clean veganism ST, which is further reduction of certain foods for the aid and assistance of other seeming God in the form of animals. So it's beneficial to God in the form of other multi-species seeming bodies, and to the seeming apparent primary body that is not really primary in truth, and then other bodies. It's beneficial to other bodies, obviously, because when there is detoxification, it affects other bodies as well. No bodies are in a vacuum anywhere. All bodies are affecting all other bodies, and the environment affecting the bodies, and the bodies affecting the environment, etc., etc. All whole. So it is the elimination and the of meat and animal products, etc., coming from animals, that assists God in the form of those animals, and also assists in the not ingesting of those substances in order for the body to be more healthy, because those substances are not inherently suitable for the body's consumption. In the God in the form of seeming evolution of the bodies, the ingestion of seeming other animals, etc., was primarily out of need, because there weren't other sources of food available, and there was resorting to that. And then there was a developed taste for such food, and then that was maintained and perpetuated. But it is not healthy for the body. Body was not meant for that kind of ingestion. There are other bodies that are suited to what would be considered carnivorism, because those bodies have evolved as such, again, due to necessity, basically. But as evolving continues, such bodies could also be altered in ways in which that would no longer be necessary as well. And that is to occur. So in reference to SSSV 73, which is a cardinal scripture of Satyavedism, there is the reduction and elimination of such toxins. The ingestion of food that was not meant to be ingested that way. And elimination, and then substitution, and then the introducing of various forms, God in the form of other suitable foods that are naturally occurring that are meant to be ingested. So when there is the sacrificing of the substances that are not healthy, the meat and the milk and the butter and the various many byproducts of the agriculturing of animals, then the body starts to respond to the substitution and the introduction of healthy substances that the body needs. So that will be felt. The body responds to that and adapts to it because the body is very malleable. So there is response to the healthy food that is eaten as the detoxification continues to occur. It will be readily felt. But there has to be the sacrifice for this process to occur. Even if the mind seems unwilling and the pseudo-egoing is unwilling, and the body at first may seem to be unwilling because it may be used to such substances. Because again, the body's adaptable to practically any seeming changes, but it is functioning in habitual processes, and there has to be some adapting to those circumstances. So there has to be what would be considered some patience involved in being able to adjust to this switch and these phases. But it is well worth the patience involved and the stamina. And it also is, the stamina is added to as this occurs. There'll be more and more energy, more and more Shakti that is seemingly uncovered, that gets brighter and brighter and more energetic, more flowing as this occurs, that will assist in the very process itself. So if it seems to be difficult, there has to be working through that and patience with that. And if necessary, a seeming slowing down a little bit, and then continuance, etc. So patience and figuring the flow of it, of how it should occur, because it varies from body to body, seemingly. But there should not be giving up on it as being not suitable for the body because it has some reactiveness. And if necessary, as has already been stated several times, some what would be called God in the happening of medical assistance in the process if necessary, or getting assistance, nutritional assistance in that process. Or it can be done without that if it seems easy. but it still should be monitored. So again, it varies depending on how the body reacts. It could seem to be difficult, or it can seem to be very easy in its flow. But there really is no such thing as a body that's not suited to it. If there seems to be some difficulty at the seeming beginning of it, and just giving up on it and saying, no, the body can't do that, is not suited for it. That's almost not. There is possibility, it could be very rare that that might be, but that is to be medically determined. These bodies are not suited to the ingestion of meat. It is not natural. So there's the quadriphasic transition to veganism, and then to clean veganism, etc. So within that process, when it gets to stage phase 3 for advanced clean veganism, and this can be done beforehand if it's seemingly in eternity. If it is relatively easy or simple to do so, but in this process, it might be better to wait until the third phase. Again, it's dependent upon the level of difficultness or ease. And all of these teachings are presented to be as simple and as easy as possible to implement in the way in which they're spoken. And they're not supposed to be difficult processes that continue endlessly and have all sorts of convoluted methods and procedures, etc. These teachings are for the benefit of all, and all, God in the form of God Omni, should be able to implement the teachings of SATYAVEDISM, the practices of SATYAVEDISM, without great difficulty or having to memorize all sorts of procedures, etc. Or else these teachings would not spread. It would simply be too difficult, and it would be considered practices of small groups that are seemingly up to the challenge of it, etc. The SATYAVEDISM is for all. So this is about making self-realization and God-realization possible for seeming all, because it is so. It already is. So it is methods and practices that make this apparent, make this obvious. So SATYAVEDISM is for all. It is not esoteric. It is not going to be cordoned off as esoteric knowledge or for small groups of and all that. So this is simple, concise, easy practices, especially the pancha, which is to be the 5 times practices, especially very straightforward, that are to be revealed, and easy to practice and implement, so that this will spread. This is to spread seemingly worldwide, and is already spread all over the omniverse, because there is no separation and there is no locality. So these practices are straightforward, and they are to be implemented. So in concerning the veganism. The veganism could occur immediately in eternity, but it is presented as a 4-step process for those that might feel that it might be more difficult than it can be. So in the 3rd phase for the Clean Veganism Advanced, there is the prescriptive of the elimination completely of all, right here, of all seeming junk foods, quote unquote. Those are undeniably unhealthy and innutritious, undeniably. Just foods that are ingested for convenience and for pure taste, but have no nutritious value. Sugary desserts, candies and sodas, etc., that are just infiltrated, full of, almost completely made of sugar, which in large doses is very, very unhealthy for the body. It creates all sorts of imbalances, including the health condition of diabetes, etc. So that's very pervasive, and that needs to be medically eliminated. There are many seeming diseases that can be eliminated purely through a healthy diet for the body, period. And the reason that so many diseases occur can be sourced to the not ingesting healthy food that was meant for the body to ingest. And it seems so obvious, but again, this is why such teachings are not wanted to be heard. They're not wanted to be taken in. They don't want to hear it because it's too difficult. It takes away from the pleasure of ingesting the substances, of just the various ways in which the substances are used, or the objects, or whatever. It all is based on in wanting pleasure for the in the wrong seeming, in the direct way, which is through realization. This is already inherently there. The seeming happiness, the seeming satisfaction. The dissatisfaction comes from constantly trying to get something from what is not the source. So then other substances like what would be considered too much salt, etc., too much pepper, which is not healthy for the digestion. The salt imbalances affects the body functioning. It can affect all sorts of functioning, heart functioning, cardiovascular, arrhythmia, etc. All sorts of the imbalances. The pepper, etc., can affect the intestines and cause all kinds of digestive problems, etc. Caffeinated beverages such as coffee and tea. Again, this affects the mind functioning, and it's another substance. It's basically a drug, and it is not the body does not manufacture it naturally, so it is taking a substance in that is not naturally generated by the body, and using it to enhance functionality seemingly, but it causes all sorts of problems that turns into a cycle of the need to have it, etc. And it is just not worth the whatever benefits it might have, because of what it does to the body that's detrimental, including natural dehydration, etc. And it is not healthy. Alcohol and cigarettes, nicotine, again, another substance that's not naturally occurring within the body. Alcohol, again, not naturally occurring within the body. This is the ingestion of unnatural to the body substances into the body, affecting all sorts of organ function, etc. And is notorious. These substances are notorious for causing ill health, and in some cases leading to body transmutation if ingested excessively. All sorts of deterioration of the functioning of organs, etc. The substances are misused. The grapes say that the alcohol is the way in which it's processed. The grapes in and of themselves, God in the form of, are actually healthy and are beneficial. It's the processing that takes place that causes it to be unhealthy. So it has alcohol. Cigarettes have notoriety. Cigarettes being that the way in which the nicotine is absorbed through the lungs, it can create lung cancer. And it's a charcoaling of the lungs. It's the same effect that eating charcoaled meat on the grill, etc., is considered at this point carcinogenic. So it is the charcoaling of the lungs, basically the baking of the lungs, that can lead to lung cancer. Again, it is not natural. It is very unhealthy. It'll be expounded after this list that ingesting anything into the lungs, any substances into the lungs, basically is unhealthy. The lungs are supposed to ingest air, oxygen. That's what the lungs' functionality is for. Well, there are other functions, but that's what it needs to ingest through the body in order for the body to function, is oxygen into the lungs. That is it. All else basically is detrimental, unless there is the need for some medications for, say, what is called asthma, to inhale to the lungs. But again, such diseases such as asthma and all, these are symptoms of underlying problems that are not, they're not in and of themselves in a vacuum. So it is, and that is best to get to the core of the problem rather than to medicate it and help that, but continue to have the symptom. So there should be always going back and back and back to the source of the seeming illnesses, the dis-ease, and finding where it is emanating from instead of relying on medications, and perpetuating that so that it becomes a dependency. And that is very much considered normal in fiction, in the fictional society, etc. And it is not. So much that has been normalized, quote unquote, in fiction basically is not beneficial. So even if it has been normalized, it should be subject to scrutiny so that it can be deconstructed, and then the beneficial procedures should occur instead. Which leads to the next on the list, which is psychiatric medications. So, and this has been expounded upon in several teachings extensively. So the psychiatric medications refer to these teachings, especially the Lssv 6, and the psychiatric medications should be eliminated if there are any, with medical help, of course, and not quickly, tapered off. But there should be requests to eliminate the psychiatric medications because, again, most psychiatric diagnoses are do not address the underlying causes of these occurrences. But it has to be done with great care. But they need to be eliminated. Next is recreational drugs, legal or illegal. Again, this has been expounded greatly in Lssv 6, Part 1 and 2. And this is why this is unpopular. Because most bodies seemingly want to ingest one form or another of what's basically considered drugs, alcohol, GIFO, marijuana, all the various substances of choice. It seems that even with the legalization of such substances, and yes, in fact, these substances should be legalized. Again, this has already been greatly gone into in Lssv 6, and in a sense it's been condoned to a certain extent or tolerated to a certain extent because these substances do help to a certain extent in some forms of deconstruction. But basically, especially recreational drugs, are not the difference between using drugs for seeming spiritual purposes and recreational purposes. For spiritual purposes of deconstruction, it's already been said that that is condoned to a certain extent or tolerated, basically, because it can be beneficial in certain ways. But nevertheless, most of those substances are not beneficial for the body, and in certain cases are not healthy for the body, especially in the way they're absorbed. And if used, should only be used for basically small periods of time, not over long periods of time that are detrimental to the body. And some of those substances are actually toxic. They cause the body to vomit, and that is not normal, etc. Feeling nausea and throwing and vomiting, throwing up, etc., are signs of toxicity to the body, etc. So that has, if having those substances though helps with the deconstruction, so be it. But basically, what is being said is that for recreational purposes, the legal and illegal drugs need to be eliminated, because if they're just being used for pleasure and for basically recreational purposes, in order to seem to try to make or create reality as being more pleasurable or more tolerable, etc., or more pleasing, etc., then in a certain way it's sort of escapism. For and it isn't usually very beneficial for body health anyway. As for it being for spiritual purposes, again, this has already been elaborated on. But ultimately, it is not. These substances are not. They're not healthy for the body, and the body's health is of utmost importance, because basically, to continue to ingest substances that are unhealthy for the body is a form of abusing the body. It is really that simple. It is a form of abuse to the body. The body needs to be cared for. The body is holy, just like all else is holy. So the recreational drugs, etc., need to be eliminated completely. And that, again, the withdrawal from these various substances that are being enumerated here can cause unhappiness or actual physical withdrawal symptoms that would almost make the body want to continue in order to feel quote normal, unquote, or better, etc. And there has to be kind of the ability to be able to withstand that sort of withdrawal that can be physical and also appear to be mental as well, thought-based. Actually having dependency physically on the substance or mentally on the substance, and the pseudo-egoing will want to continue it, will not want to give it up, because there will be this there might be the feelings of not wanting to go to what's called normal reality, because normal reality is boring, or it is difficult, or it causes unhappiness. But that's it. You have to get to the core of why those feelings occur. Why is there this avoidance of what would be considered normal reality? Because it's a basic misunderstanding of what reality is. So the taking away of these substances might lead to forcing having to deal with, quote unquote, or to recognize what is causing the unhappiness from taking these substances away. Now again, taking away of other substances is going to be beneficially felt. So it is sort of like a give and take of certain substances will cause alleviation and more energy, and taking away of other substances might cause unhappiness. So it can feel or appear to be a tumultuous process, depending, again, body to body, depending on what combination of toxins are involved. And again, normal, what's considered more normal body functioning in fiction, relativity, in the fictional society as it presents itself to appear, there is a lot of ingesting of unhealthy substances, and it's considered normal, and it's so detoxifying and just withdrawing from all of this is going to look or appear to be abnormal. And there's another component involved in this process, which is the having to the seeming fictional interaction of pseudo-egoing involved with having to deal with the dynamic of seeming non-participation in what is considered normal. So with when drinking, ingesting of alcohol is considered normal, and then God in the form of those that appear to be friends, or see God in the form of seeming what is called family, etc. When there's non-participation in those ingestions, like say there's not the eating of meat, there is not the drinking of alcohol, there is not the taking of drugs, then it is, and then those that are seemingly eating God in the form of, those are continuing, those are seeming to function normally by eating meat, ingesting meat, and drinking various alcohol and wine and substances, whatever, and or smoking favorite substances, etc. Then there's seeming commonality of those activities can appear in fictional pseudo-egoing to be the not participating in, seems to cause a disruption of that seeming to get along or to seemingly fit in, and then the emotional component occurs, where it is when there's the giving up of all of those activities, that there's feeling of not fitting in and not being accepted anymore, or having sort of pressure to not give those unhealthy substances up. And it's all just basically fictional group mentality perpetuating itself, and there has to be strength in this process, and just the innate knowing that going through this process of giving things up and withdrawing from unhealthy, unbeneficial to the body substances and activities, basically, there has to be that knowing, that direct knowing, because they're speaking to God, about God directly, God. So the seeming person is not real. So these emotions that might occur, or this seeming situationing that might occur, that has to do with all the fictional this is the very process itself, the deconstructing as well. So as this purification process is going on, it also, in tandem, is helping with the deconstruction process. But there has to be that willingness, the God will, for the processing to occur without what would be called caving in, without just what is called in fiction giving in to peer pressure. What is called that there has to be the respect for the process of going towards self-realization and God realization, that God that you are, that right now in eternity and always are. To uncover that, quote unquote, seemingly, to uncover that. So these processes are very important, but there has to be the non-belief in the pseudo-egoing that's saying seemingly otherwise. That's why when these thoughts come up, the thoughts can be investigated, but thoughts have to be, in certain cases, the thoughts have to be just discarded. Like, you know, the fictional thoughts. Oh, what will so and so think if now I'm not doing this anymore? Quote unquote, the pseudo personality that isn't really real is not doing that anymore. It's not going to fit in because then it's going to lose friends, going to alienate family, potentially, all these fears that aren't real, all these potentialities that aren't really real. But it is not leading to the possibility and the openness and the endless possibilities that can manifest from the discarding of what is unhealthy, what is not beneficial, and what is in the way of realization. So it can get very seemingly complicated in its on the level of body sensations, having seeming problems or troubles with body sensations being difficult, and seeming pseudo-egoing, of seeming pseudo-ego self and seeming pseudo-egoing of others, God in the form of. Seeming non-cooperation at all. So this does not mean that you have to break seeming fictional associations and ties, etc., in order to accomplish these processings of giving up, of throwing off what is not beneficial. It is not about alienation or from seeming others. It is just a God willing health, God manifesting health. God manifesting activities that are of a seeming higher benefit, rising above activities that are not conducive to realization. And so that may appear as difficulty, but nevertheless, this is why it is seemingly cannot appear to not be easy. Oh. And then there's in the list the reducing to a bare minimum of prescription medications already expressed. There's no reason that the body ultimately should be on any prescription medications. If any prescription medications are used, they should be used temporarily, and then the body just temporarily in eternity. That's all. And any prescriptions that need to be seemingly that they're the pseudo personality saying that it needs to be extensively used, basically in avoidance of finding the core reason or causes of dysfunctionality. So go to the core, always source back to the core of the difficulty physically. Do not settle for palliative prescriptioning of the symptom. Very, very simple and straightforward. But in fiction, it does not usually present that way. It may be more difficult to find what the source is. Proceed that way. Find it. Find out what the source of the seeming cause is. And for almost all of these seeming bodily ailments, almost all will be sourced back to not ingesting healthy foods, not ingesting healthy substances, and most primary, not ingesting healthy thoughts. This is where God thought is, and God manifesting, and then there'll be many teachings about God manifesting. God manifesting is quite an extensive. Yes. That if the manifesting is not beneficial, then the body will suffer. The body usually suffers by diseases. So the God manifesting is primary knowledge that needs to be conveyed in many, many teachings. So those are main reasons for disease, for all sorts of malfunctioning and disease of bodies. And this is why the teachings are so important, because they're going to be able to express what needs to be God manifested in order for the bodies to be healthy. But that involves abstaining and withdrawing from substances and then not reintroducing them again. This is not that withdrawing or detoxifying in fiction has these connotations that they detoxify for a certain period of time in eternity, which doesn't exist, and then go back to what was being done, and then have to re-detoxify or detoxify at some point, meaning like these sort of detox in between basically ingesting unhealthily. It's almost like what occurs with what is called dieting, having the body has been deemed to be have too much weight on it, then withdraw certain foods in order to get to a particular weight that is supposed to be pleasing, and then it always ends up gaining the weight back, and then trying to lose the weight and gain the weight back, and lose the weight and gain the weight back. And again, that is another symptom of an underlying cause of that sort of behavioring not being resolved, not sourcing it back to what the real seeming problem might be, because there is not being able to control the body's appetite, and so there's this never-ending process of withdrawing and then ingesting too much and withdrawing, and then ingesting too much and withdrawing and ingesting too much, and it just goes on and on, unresolved. So there are all sorts of processes like that seem to occur that are very similar in that nature, sort of what would be called habitually, that never get resolved. And this is all about resolving these problems. So anyway, the prescription medications, non-prescription medications, basically when the body becomes completely healthy through these processes, the body does not need any of this stuff, because the body never needed any of it. It was misplaced ingestion. So the prescription medications are not needed anymore. The non-prescription medications are not needed anymore. The body will be very seemingly pleased to not have to need, quote, need any of this anymore, because it was not meant to. It was not meant to absorb it in the seeming first place in eternity. But this has all become normal, quote unquote, normal. Fiction being normal. What's normal? What is normal? Normal doesn't mean anything. See something, do it. See something, do it. It's just like, mimic, etc. So make the body stop the mimicry. Make the body, and the mind has to, there has to be investigating of why. Here's a food. Here's a seeming food about incoming. Why is this food healthy? Why is this food being eaten? What is this food? What is this food made of? Of course, it's all made of consciousness, but what is this food seemingly made of? Is this food beneficial? Is it not beneficial? If it's not beneficial, why is this food about to be ingested? Because the body says, I want. And how did that want get created in the first place in eternity? So all of it has to be investigated. Sometimes it has, if seemingly every single step has to be investigated, so be it. Look at it. What is it? How much is it? So most seeming problems with weight, underweight, overweight, whatever. Again, it all comes back to what is the source of this, of the dissatisfaction. What is the source of the disease? What is the source? God manifestation teachings. Again, this will go into the seeming proactive ways in which it is manifesting to withdraw certain substances, but it's also God manifesting to be seemingly to have proactive activities that with full power, seemingly behind full power and God intent. So a lot of this of these ingestions of various substances or another, and multi-ingestions or whatever, are basically based on the not having really examined what is going on, why all this is happening, what all that is. It hasn't been examined. It's just been taken for granted in fiction, in the dream. And so that's just, well, these bodies are doing that. This body seemingly was born in this situation and in this culture or whatever, and all these bodies are doing this and all these bodies are acting that way, so it's normal. And there's no questioning any of it. There's no investigation of why any of it's occurring. Well, it's just, usually. Of course, there are bodies that seemingly are investigating this. So have God manifestation of these investigations are conducive to the health of the body and the mind and all, etc. So there should be these investigations. I'm researching in order to uncover information that is about the health of body and what substances are not healthy and what substances are seemingly, etc. All that. So there's researching and investigating in that regard as well. And if necessary, there has to be the implementation in God manifesting the medical help and the seeming quotes called professional help involved in manifesting this. Now, if this seems simple, then that is probably because there's already, having done some of this procedurally already, and so it's not a seeming far jump way over to this sort of resolution. This is why it depends on the seeming body, what has the quote, the God work that has already been done. But if there are bodies where this God work has not been done and has not been thought about, etc., then this is a process. It's a process. But with the patience and with the work, the God work involved and the God manifesting involved in this process, there will be quote rewards. The body is to get great relief, and is to start to function at high capacity, with in the mind with great clarity. But all of this has to be discarded. Basically, all this unhealthy manifesting must be discarded. It must be given up for God, in service to oneself as God. God, the God work involved. So the pseudo-egoing has to stop making excuses for the body's desires that are unbeneficial, regardless, even if it appears to be beneficial and it is not. It has to be able to give that up, and the pseudo-egoing has to stop making excuses, because God manifesting is above all that pseudo-egoing. That's just a process. The person does not exist. So the person doesn't even have to get out of the way. The pseudo-egoing has to be deconstructed in order to have that clear. So those are the main components of the various substances that need to be eliminated. So if they're broken down into a smaller sort of sectioning of them, it would be that the food that's ingested, what is called food, God in the form of, basically has to be healthy for the body appearance, hallucination, that you are not, because God exists alone. So the food ingestion of the body, the other substances that are not healthy, the various and sundry substances, the recreational self-medication, basically that's what it is, quote-unquote body medication of alcohol and tobacco and psychiatric medications and recreational drugs and spiritual drugs. Because when it comes down to this, when it becomes very serious in self-realization and God realization, then even though there's been deconstruction with the help of some of those toxic self-body medications, basically, there has to be the throwing off of those as well, in order to get to real core. sadhana, to uncover, to clear, to clarify, to remove pollution, to remove the fiction, to deconstruct it. So this is the deconstruction of seeming substances. And again, there's going to be this pseudo-egoing, sort of wanting to do this rebellion, fictional story nonsense. Rebel against fiction. Rebel against the dream. Processing. Don't take my stuff away from me. Me, who's me? So ridiculous. Anyway, so try not to be offended, whatever pseudo-egoing is going on. It's only for the benefit of all. And if there's understanding that it's for the benefit of all, then there should be cooperation for the benefit of all. That's what the God willingness should be. God willing to go through this, have this processing occur. Now, in eternity, now, to SSSV 82, which is here, up, right there, and everywhere. SSSV 82 is for the integral methods, of which there are many, classified as Kundalini Yoga. It's pranayama, breath, and God energy. So, at the toward the seeming end of the scripture, there are techniques. There are 2 techniques of pranayama techniques that are very simple and very core, and are also to be included in the pancha practices. And those can be looked at. But above most of the scripture, it regards breath purification. Now, breath is used in the more expansive sense. Sense. So breath means the breathing and life force, etc. So breath is not just in regards to what is called the form structuring called lungs. It also extends to the breathing of the skin of the body hallucination. So because the pores breathe in the various substances as well, even though they may not appear to look like that, because the pores are quite minuscule. Nevertheless, there are many countless pores seemingly on the body, and they excrete and ingest as well. So that's a form of breath. Just as the lungs excrete, in a sense, the carbon dioxide and ingest oxygen and transform it into other substance. So, and again, all of this is why there is no real delineation of form, because that's all. It may appear that there are forms, but all of that giving and taking is going on, quote unquote, even though it doesn't appear to be and is. So there really, again, it blurs the lines of delineation of form endlessly, and form within form within form, etc. So again, there is no really a form. It is basically a concept, and it looks like that, but is not ultimately. So the deep breath is about the breathing in of oxygen to the lungs, and also the breathing in of substances through the skin, which is what is called an organ. The lungs being an organ, and the skin in science being called an organ as well. It's the largest organ, quote unquote, of the body in actuality, in the is seemingly apparent. So, Om. So purification of air is purification of breath. So purifying, and this involves, again, reduction of toxins, etc., within the seeming environment around the seeming body form, what would be called the habitual abode, or whatever. Of course, the abode is the omniverse, God omniverse, but what seems to be the abode of the physical body appearance. So because it is readily in the vicinity seeming and affects, just as ingestion of substances affects. So there is to reduce exposure to pollutants, seemingly what is called external, and not seemingly what would be ingestion in the sense that food seems to be ingestion, nevertheless is ingestion. So the substitution can be implemented slowly or at whatever speed. It depends on, again, circumstances, item by item. And mainly this is to not be, it says to not be wasteful of what is already in use unless it's toxic, like just straight out toxic, like so in the sort of going toward the minimalistic approach, and let it be stated that this does not have to appear to be minimalism, like, though the seeming preference might be toward minimalism because it is more simple, basically, and more easy to keep track of, and ultimately there's just less complexity and less ability to get out of hand, quote unquote, or to have the mind get absorbed in it and get carried away with all the complexity of what seems to be around the body in all the different manifestations. So what is called minimalism is actually helpful and conducive to mental clarity, or going toward mental clarity. But it is not necessary to practice minimalism ultimately, because the body seemingly is, the body seemingly is going to move around and navigate, etc. And there's endless complexity seemingly in forms and situationings in God Omni. So in a sense, minimalism is just, there's no minimalism in a vacuum, in other words, quote unquote. It's just, it's a way of expressing, but ultimately it is not real as well. There is no minimalism ultimately, because there is no way to close down something and make it simple when there's so much seeming complexity everywhere in eternity. So anyway, so there can be choosing of minimalism for appearancing around the seeming body or not. but trying to reduce the exposure to pollutants is beneficial. So unless there are certain substances in, quote, what is called the local environment, unless those substances are outright toxic, period, there isn't a necessity to start to discard and get rid of such substances quickly or immediately. So if there are some that are not really toxic or whatever, then those objects, seemingly God in the form of, can be replaced at convenience when those objects are no longer of seeming service for the usage in which they were, the God in the form of the objects were implemented. So one is listed here: no inhalants into the respiratory system, except for mandatory medical purposes and not via burning. So this has already been addressed, and it'll be addressed a little more here. This is what, to make it as clear as possible. Clear. The lungs are supposed to be used, and the purpose of the lungs is supposed to be used to ingest oxygen and then to distribute the oxygen via the various systems, whatever, the heart, etc., all throughout the body, and basically to create the blood cells, etc. It's just the various biological purposes. But the body cannot continue to be in form without the oxygen. So the purer the oxygen, meaning the less there is that comes in with the oxygen, the better. That is what the lungs are for. So when there is ingesting of other substances with the lungs, then that is going to cause less clarity, basically, within the lungs. And if there is ingestion of other substances in the lungs that actually cling to the various lining and all that, and cause all sorts of deposits, etc., then that is going to basically get in the way of the filtration, into the absorption, the ingestion of the once the oxygen is in the lungs, in order for it to basically be released throughout the body, in order to have the body functioning, work properly. So what are called air pollutants are various substances that are mixed in with the oxygen that are not, quote, particularly natural, although it said all of this is God nature. But not all of what is God nature functions in a healthy fashion when mixed in with particular forms or whatever. It will malfunction and can cause God transmutation to forms. They're just simply not made to evolutionarily, are not made to adapt to that sort of integration. So there should be no inhalants basically to the respiratory system, except for medical purposes, and even for medical purposes that should be limited, and it should be spoken when speaking. Like, for instance, if there has to be a medical procedure, then it might be determined what sort of seeming temporary medication has to be administered in order for, like, what is called anesthesia for the body. So they may be not wanting to to have a medication used in for certain procedures. It doesn't need to be. It may be suggested that certain substance be used, but it's not mandatory. There may be other procedures or operations where it is mandatory, basically, in order to go forward with the fixing of particular ailments of the body that cannot be fixed any other way except for God and the happening of medical intervention. And in that case, then it can be spoken in order to come up with the best medication that might suit that. But it should not just be taken for granted that basically whatever is administered is what is administered, or whatever, without having what would be called consultation. You should never just go along with it, just like without having any questions asked about it, or maybe there might be a reduced dosage, or maybe another medication that might be better, or whatever. All of this, again, is just temporary, and it would be basically for what would be considered a mandatory intervention, because the body needed it in order to continue to be informed. So for those sort of medical purposes, if this is not palliative and it's absolutely necessary, then of course, then that would be appropriate. So for mandatory medical purposes. So 2, no air pollutants of any sort in enclosed spaces, such as, so enclosed space would be what would be called an abode, or a place where the body is usually put to for what is called living. So no air pollutants of any sort in enclosed spaces, such as A, artificially or naturally scented perfumes, and B, smoke, incense, substances in ritual or otherwise. Now again, this is not would not be considered. This is more taking away of certain substances that, and there might be some pseudo-egoing dissatisfaction of bodies used to using perfumes in order to feel clean, or that the regularly scheduled programming has made it so that the mind has ingested this information and thinks that this is, quote, normal and usual social activity and fiction. Perfumes, it's just like, well, all the bodies are wearing perfumes or whatever, so it's like, this perfume smells nice, and whatever, it's pleasing, and etc. But what happens with that is that God in the form of a lot of those perfumes are made of chemicals, various chemicals, and they're combined, or the way in which they're administered through sprays, etc. The chemicals are not healthy. They're not healthy to ingest through the pores in the skin and then get into the bloodstream, etc. When this is compounded, when there are various substances that are used, and they'll be mentioned, cleaning substances to clean the skin, clean the hair, etc., got in the form of and all. And they're combined when those substances are not only when there are multi-toxic substances in a particular substance, but then there is the compounding of those main substances then all mixed together, and then they're ingested into the body, and yes, it gets in through the pores, and they're actually ingested into the body. That those are unhealthy, and cumulatively don't know what the effects, do not know what the effects could be if these various substances are, no matter how seemingly minute, when they're basically, when it's not just one substance with many substances in it, but then there are multi-substances with multi-substances within it. They all get into the body. You don't know what the ramifications are when they're combined together. There are chemical reactions that occur that can cause ill health and even cancers, be carcinogenic. Now, even though science may or may not pinpointed and sourced this all to this causes cancer and that causes cancer, this causes this disease, that causes that disease, it does. Sometimes there doesn't need to be waiting in eternity to find out later in eternity that in fact that was unhealthy. It's like there are lots of substances. All it needs to be is to look at the labels on the back of the containers, and if there are multisyllabic chemicals which are not known as to what, just offhand, cannot be. It cannot be determined what they seem to be. Then why would that be put in the body? Why? Because all of this has to be investigated. Can't simply just take a substance that looks like it's in a nice container and it smells okay or it smells great or whatever, and just apply it to the body many, many times without investigating like what it actually is, what it's made of, what are the components. It's like, and then it gets into the water. The water that is then ingested by bodies. All of it ends up in the waste system through urination, etc. It goes into the water. There have already been tests done on the got in the form of the various water sources that are in. And there are so many chemicals that are in the seeming water supplies, got in the form of the that when combined unintentionally, we were never supposed to be combined this way, are not only unhealthy for re-ingestion even after seeming water purification, coming back in the form of tap water, etc. Then it gets into the environment, got in the form of the land, the ocean, etc. There's just like there's this constant outsource of all that seemed to have come from, got in the form of certain objects that were applied or ingested, and then get transmuted into other systems, and this is why this leads to contamination of the environment, etc. That's one of the ways in which it happens. So all of this has to be investigated. It has to be investigated through God consciousness, and and then there has to be witnessing as to what these substances are, what are the usages of these substances, and then where the substances seem to go, if there's this understanding that they're in fact are being breathed in or ingested. Don't just disappear, quote unquote. May look like it just disappears, but nothing disappears that way. There's nothing that is wasted. All is just transmuted. It's transformed. It's never. So the scented perfumes got in the form of, and then there's the smoking incense again, which is perfume as well, in ritual or otherwise. So smoke the smoke incense, albeit for whatever purpose it is, just in order to make it the environment seem to smell better, or for what is called meditation, or in ritual, as offering to God, etc. And then there's like the burning of substances, etc. Again, this is not going to be what is called popular, because all of this may seem culturally to be quite normal, and or seemingly even in service to God. But it is not in service to God to have the body be unhealthy, to manifest processes that cause the body to be unhealthy. So in service to God means that there has to be God thought about the processes that are occurring for full God service, for real service to God. So if those substances seem to be, can be detrimental to the body, then it is not really in service to God. So it has to be thought about. And let the pseudo-egoing not get all convoluted about it. So this means for ritual purposes, and this extends to veganism and ahimsa, non-harm. So eliminate basically smoky incense or whatever. I mean, there are environments where there is so much smoke from incense that it actually stains the walls like a certain color, because it has permeated the walls, the wall coloring, and created another color. Imagine what that seemingly does to the air, and then imagine again what it seemingly could do to the lungs if this happens a lot, if this is an ongoing habitual reoccurrence. So this is where social normalizing of processes, even in religious contexts, that has to be rethought. It has to be thought in whole health context to the bodies, to the environment, to God in the form of other multi-species. So of course, the not using of animal products in seeming rituals, etc. And of course, in religious rituals, the archaic aspect of sacrificing gift of God in the form of animals to God also needs to cease to exist. That is to no longer happen. So that does not even have to be stated, but it is being stated nevertheless. So no smoke, incense, substances. Now here's seems to be a difficulty. Again, this has to be transcended. In SATYAVEDISM, the various rituals, such as that puja that is not to involve smoke, incense. Now, again, within a closed, confined area. Perhaps out in the wilderness somewhere, if there want to be burning of substances. It's not particularly great for the environment, but at least there's a lot of air where it can dissipate. But it is not particularly healthy to the environment, but it would be much better. There has to be that. But in SATYAVEDISM, there doesn't have to be any burning of any substances. So there's no pollution to the air. There's no burning of incense. There's no burning of what would be sage in order to smoke, to clarify to banish the seeming unhealthy spirits or whatever. That's all basically psychological. Those are psychological tools in order to make the mind feel the content, feel that the space is being cleared. But basically, it's the opposite. It is not clearing the space. It is polluting the space. It is polluting the lungs as well. Burning such substances as sage and then breathing it in is actually not healthy for the lungs. It is not healthy for the environment of the abode, etc. The only way in which it might be, again, resorting to outdoors, quote unquote, in infinity, it could be an excusable whatever way of doing that. But again, various religions or practices of spiritual practices such as that are basically done because they've just been done, and they haven't been questioned really as to what the physical health ramifications of such practices are. Just because it's been done before doesn't mean that it has to continue to be done in eternity. Om. So in SATYAVEDISM, Om, there is no burning of smoke, incense, substances. There's no burning of various substances in order to smudge and whatever that. There's and there is no picking of flowers or garlanding of flowers. There's no sacrificing. There are no animal, God in the form of, there are no animal sacrifices, Om. There are no flower sacrifices, Om. Yes, God in the form of flower sacrifices. There's no need to prematurely God transmute flowers in order to please God, Om. God thought, God thought. God investigation. Investigate. Why are these practices continuing? I mean, the presenting of God in the form of flowers is supposed to seemingly a beautiful gesture. It's seemingly beautiful gesture. The flowers are beautiful. Om. But the flowers, God in the form of the flowers, are more beautiful naturally occurring as God in the form of the flowers in the natural way in which the flowers occur. Not as garlanded around a body seemingly dead. Now, of course, they're not dead, they're transmuting, but nevertheless, those flowers, the flowers, God in the form of the flowers do not need to be sacrificed in that way. Now, if there wants to be continuance of doing that, again, none of these teachings are mandatory. Teachings are not mandatory. Nothing is mandatory. And try not, as God, try not to take offense with the pseudo-egoing process in you know, how can that be said? No, flowers, they're beautiful, whatever. It's like, how can that be said? It can be said. This is speaking for the flowers, God in the form of the flowers. I am God. I am everything. I am God Omni. I am those God in the form of those flowers. And God is speaking for those flowers right now and saying there is no need to transmute those flowers prematurely for such purposes. Om. So it is not healthy for the God in the form of the flowers. And then it is not healthy for the burning of these substances for the body. So may this information, God information, be absorbed in God consciousness. Om. There are many, many ways in which God can be seemingly worshipped, but it does not, these ways do not have to be manifested in unhealthy appearancing or transmutation of bodies in order to show God love and God worship. Om. 3. Om. The opening of windows frequently for increased air current cross ventilation in all seasons in eternity. Om. So that means that if there is a seemingly enclosed abode, that the windows be opened for all the air to come in order to be ingested into the lungs and circulate, because the air is free and the air wants to go, God in the form where it goes. Om. So you're inviting the air in order to recirculate. Om. And to be beneficial. Om. And cross-current ventilation means that the air has all these different currents, and it goes depending on how the air basically is currenting in the flows. And this goes to the whole God in the form of the earth currents. God in the form of all the planet currents basically have all sorts of different pockets of currents that take place, and it's like the vortexes, actually the polar, God in the happening of the polar vortex. Om, in particular, God in the form of earth is particularly of importance, and they'll be speaking of that in relation to what is called God in the happening of global warming. Om, and how crucial Om that is, the polar vortex, etc. However, there are also currentings in vortexing, etc., that take place when the windows are when there are multiple God in the form of seeming windows open. The cross ventilation is very helpful. Unless there's pollutants that are coming in which case then close the windows temporarily until the pollutants pass. Such as what would be called barbecuing, etc., wafting through, etc. 4. Care for indoor thriving God in the form of non-toxic plants that produce the highest oxygen output. So for ingestion of oxygen, there's the cooperation of God in the form of plants throughout the whole throughout the whole environment. And this can be applied what is called indoors. Again, no in, no outer, whatever, the abode, the place where the body appears as usually. And so there is a placement of plants as God in the form of accompanying. The plants can, God in the form of, be taught, spoken to as God. Of course, almost anything seemingly can be spoken to as God, even inanimate objects. There is no differentiation of that. So the more speaking to God, the better, as God. So they would be speaking to God in the form of plants and getting God in the form of, God in the happening of cooperation. And so the plants then can be a source of more in oxygen to be breathed in and clear some of the impurities that might exist in the air out, and that's beneficial to God health of the parent bodies. So, but there are what would be considered toxic plants as well to particular bodies, and so if that should be a caution if so. And also to other bodies, seemingly like God in the form of cats or dogs or Gifo, other multi-species bodies, if they're in the vicinity, it should be taken into account so that there isn't ingestion that could be poisonous to those bodies as well. All of that should be taken into account. And also the purification of the environment helps those bodies, God in the form of those bodies as well. Yeah. So 5, for cleansing, use unscented, non-toxic substances whenever possible. Again, this has already seemingly been stated. Is there are soaps and detergents and hair moisturizers and etc. Those again that go into the body and into the water system. So minimalism being practiced in that regard, and also figuring out the cooperation about figuring out and researching what substances are most natural. There are a lot of seemingly natural substances that serve just as much functionality purposes as the seeming what are really toxic substances. That all those substances have to be phased out, so there's not so cleansing the body can actually occur instead of putting toxins in the body as thinking that there's cleansing. So there's investigation so that those substances can be eliminated, and they can have unscented just natural cleansers. 6, skin needs air and water. Keep all else minimal. Basically says it. The skin breathes air also, and it takes in water. And skin does not really need much else unless there's some sort of infection or going on, or abnormality that might lead to getting medical help. Search would be in the dermatological regards. Again, that can be sourced back to food ingestion as well. A lot of dermatological problems are sourced to not ingesting the appropriate substances, etc. Air and water. 7, eliminate substances that skin can breathe and absorb via shampoos, soaps, moisturizers, perfumes, deodorants, makeup, with ingredients. By the way, 5 also applies to such substances as detergents for cleaning of floors, or just cleaning of a lot of various cleaning agents that are just basically toxic, and come in toxic form, like aerosol spray, etc., that are actually, well, whatever. Those are to be phased out. So the deodorants, makeup, all of this is unnecessary. Seemingly, even like such substances for like antiperspirant, etc. It's like the body needs to perspire. The body needs to have the pores to let substances, natural substances and toxic substances, come out of the pores. So to clog the pores with a substance that has toxins in it and prevents the pores from then eliminating naturally through the system, basically eliminating substances, forces the body to keep those substances within it. And that is unnatural, and it gets in the way of the proper functioning of the body, including the lymphatic system. That then, when there's tampering with the lymphatic system, there can be all sorts of diseases that come from that. So such antiperspirants, deodorant, God in the form of what are called deodorants would be better, but even that really is unnecessary. And if that need be, because there are a lot of deodorizing comes from the fact that if the food is not healthy, then it actually makes the body smell in ways in which would be, that is considered normal, that is really abnormal, because the body has to process these toxins that it doesn't, that it wants to get, it needs to get rid of. And then, so again, they have to source it back instead of masking the symptoms. If there are seeming smells, then where is this coming from? Why is this happening? And source it back instead of just resorting to what is considered normal procedures that end up causing more problems. Yes, this is all very convoluted, but it is all, in fact, real like that, in that it has to be, this is part of the, this is a very important aspect of the detoxification. So, that have chemical preservatives and additives, toxic contaminants, and B, animal byproducts. So choose vegan alternatives. So again, some of these God in the form of some of these substances need not even be used. This is why minimalism approach can eliminate a lot of this without having to go into the actual so-called ingredients of these substances. It can actually just eliminate the substances completely as not being necessary. And you find that the body adapts, and that it can be seen that those substances or objects were not really needed. A lot of this is just a lot of availability of items that are not necessary and are not particularly healthy. Oh. And then certainly not those that use animal byproducts. There are of some of these objects or substances being spoken of, there are now vegan alternatives to them, and natural and vegan. Certainly there is no need to use the God in the form of animals that way, as sort of as leftovers, and that it is just not the ingestion into the skin of such anyway. 8, select skin and hair hygiene substances with natural and minimal ingredients. So the body needs to be bathed, and it even can go without what would be called soap. But if there is use of soap, it's just like God in the form of Castile soap, just real simple. It can be multi-purpose, used in many ways, and it's natural, has minimal ingredients. And it just do not need all of this multi-ingredient hodgepodge of. 9, eliminate bed pillows, bedding with ingredients such as A, chemicals, preservatives, additives, toxic contaminants, and B, animal byproducts such as leather, feathers, wool, etc., unless verifiable that the God in the form of the animals are lovingly treated and not injured in processing. Now that's very, at this point, it's very difficult, if not almost impossible, to verify such activity, that the animals were not mistreated in some way, or with all the factory agricultural farming, industrial animal farming has made seeming God in the form of animals into just object product. But this is all to be ceased. And very much so will be. But as the speaking is occurring, it is going on, and it is very difficult, if not impossible, to know that the animals were treated lovingly with no for say feathers or wool. I mean, it is possible feathers fall to the ground. The wool may be shown very carefully without one cut to the body, or whatever, but it's very unlikely. And it's also known that for GIFO, feathers, and wool, there's industrial farming where there are all sorts of atrocities that occur just in order to get those outer coverings of the body, the bodies. So there should not be partaking in such activities, so that those activities may cease. The God in the form of the animals need those. Basically, need those. That's what the coverings are there for. So should leave the coverings there naturally, the way the coverings are. So find appropriate substitutions, and there are becoming more and more available that are just as functional for, say, warmth of bodies, for bedding, for pillows, not toxic alternatives like various plastics, etc. Their pillows are stuffed with all kinds of foam that has all sorts of chemicals on them, and the main problem with that is that since the body is put down to be for regeneration for a period of time in eternity, and it's very usual, it's an ongoing habitual process, that the body is exposed to those chemicals that it would readily breathe in, especially a God in the form of a seeming pillow, directly into the mouth or nostrils, etc., into the lungs. So to have a God in the form of a seeming pillow filled with foam chemical combination is just not great exposure to prolonged exposure in eternity. All of this has to be thought of. And then, of course, after all these various, all this is very investigated, it'll become more and more seemingly habitual and on autopilot, so that this sort of investigation then it sort of doesn't have to continue. It happens, and then there's acclimatizing, acclimation, and then it becomes just standard autopilot procedure, and not of it. And the environment gets detoxified, the body gets detoxified, the all around gets detoxified, and the God in the form of the world will get detoxified, Om, etc. This is how it manifests. This is how God manifests this. Om. So replace with organic substances such as cotton, etc. Just other, or 10. Hold the breath while quickly passing by dispersing contaminants, and release the breath when cleared. So this is sort of a quick form of pranayama. When there is, the body is passing by a seeming substance that's being dispersed, and it is not healthy. Say a bunch of smoke or whatever. Then before approaching the cloud of smoke, the breath should be held, and then the body goes through and over out the other side of the seeming smoke, and then exhale. That is pranayama, the quickest form of pranayama for not inhaling a toxic substance. Upon encountering contaminated areas, rectify and or depart the body, God in the form of, if possible, until clear of airborne pollution. So if the body happens to come in seemingly to an area that isn't ventilated, and the body can be sensed, because the more and more there is detoxification, the more the body can pick up on and is sort of sensitive to contaminants, etc., when they occur. Whereas before, God in the form, seemingly, when the body was full of toxins, it actually it desensitizes the sort of the receptivity. So because there's all that pollution going on, so if there's some other aspect of pollution that seems to be incoming, it's not going to really notice it very much. So when the body comes into a seeming contaminated area, it can God manifest by clearing that area of the substance directly, or if that's not possible, then it should the body should depart from the contaminated area immediately until it can be seen that it then becomes clear, or not. If it's not clear, then not be involved in it. So, and then for the rest of Lssv 82, there are two core pranayama techniques that are very simple, and again, it will be in the as part of the Panka. So refer to those if there is interest. And the pranayama techniques should be done. That can be done quickly, and then sort of interspersed throughout activity at will, God will. Instead of, like, say, long sessions of pranayama seemingly in eternity, there can be very short sessions that happen frequently. So, say if the body is, if there's some sort of anxiety or whatever going on, or the mind want to slow the mind down, there's too much activity going on that may not feel great or something, then with the pranayama can immediately be used to adjust the breathing, to get more oxygen to the lungs, to disperse that oxygen out, then affecting the mind, then and the be immediate feeling of that, etc. And then the mind can usually slows somewhat, and etc. So, but it should be done frequently and used, especially if there are feelings going on that are not that are not beneficial. Of course, there are all sorts of other techniques as well, but pranayama techniques, these are definitely beneficial. And through prolonged use,
Hey. Oh, come here. Can you say hello? Say hello. Come on, say hi.
Say Om. Ooh, look. Yeah. Om. That was God in the form of Christoph Jabril. Yeah. Oh. Oh. All right. So, Come on.
Come on. Come here.
Gifo Mika and Christoph Jabril.
Yeah.
Yes, pranayama. Of course, there'll be many teachings, and pranayama, God in the happening of pranayama will also be involved. Okay, so refer to SSSV 82 for those pranayama techniques. So detox, purification of the body. So those are some of the main ways in which the body can be detoxified.
What's going on? What's going on?
Should have the God in the form of Mika and Christoph come more to visit here. Can put him up. Mika likes to be cradled like a Gifo little baby, body form, etc. Christoph, God in the form, is seemingly a little more shy to be seen, but can see if that can occur. Om. So if there are any questions or maybe wanting to inquire about ways in which these detoxifications processes can be facilitated, please leave information, and then there can be more teachings that might be able to address some of these aspects more in depth, and because this is very much of great importance. And of course, there will be other teachings as well to go deeper and deeper into these investigations and processes. So it may be that some of this needs to be done seemingly one after another in the processing, or again can happen concurrently, but it depends on ability or facility, etc. So take that into consideration, and as well as getting assistance in certain aspects, medically. So bless this convergence in all its phenomenal aspecting, seen and unseen. Om Paravak Shakti. Om Satyanandam. Om Tat Sat.